Alright, this is the free response section. We're going to work our way through one of them. And I want you to pay particular attention to how to phrase your answers in a way that will get you credit, because that's the real way to get a good score. It's less about, well, to some degree it's about knowing stuff about government. But putting that onto a page in a way that the grader wants to give you credit is different. Alright, so first things first, let's read the directions so you don't have to waste any time reading those on the day of the test. It says you have 100 minutes, or an hour and 40 minutes is another way to say that. You have 100 minutes to answer all the questions. Unless the directions indicate otherwise, respond to all parts of all 4 questions. Sometimes they'll say pick 2 of these or pick 1 of these. But it is suggested you take a few minutes to plan and outline each answer. That's kind of up to you. They said spend approximately a fourth of your time on each question, about 25 minutes. That's different than the AP economics test where they have a long one and 2 short ones. This one is 4 equally long questions. So spend about a fourth of your time. I don't panic about the time. Typically, if you know what you're doing, your answers don't have to be just huge and complicated. So you often don't run out of time. You have extra, which is awesome because you need to go back and check your answers. All right. In your response, it says, in your response, use substantive examples where appropriate. In other words, if you can think of an example to illustrate your point, to make it clear to, not you, nobody cares about you, I care about you, but the AP people don't. They care about what the grader puts on your page. So you should care about the grader. If those help the grader understand your answer, you should use them. Okay? Make certain to number each of your answers as the question is numbered below. You, of course, want to tell the grader, hey, here's where I'm answering question number 1. And within question number 1, don't sort of blend it all together in just an elegant essay that touches on each of these topics in turn. No. When you're answering part A, put A. Write your answer. Sometimes you accidentally answer part B at the same time. If you do, you're like, oh yeah, I just answered part B also. Right? This is A and B. Tell the grader what question you're answering. Alright? A couple of other points. You want to do your best to spell things right. To capitalize the first letter of a sentence. To capitalize things that need to be capitalized, like proper nouns, like the Senate and a senator and the president. Because that will make the grader the impression that you're somebody that needs points. They will be relieved to have somebody attending to detail. And so they want to give you points. I know they're not supposed to act like that, but they're humans and they do. Alright, so, and then I'll bring up the rubric as we work through each of these questions. The first one says the Federalist Paper number 10, which is one of the ones I tell you to know it by, kind of not by heart, but know the major topic. No, the Federalist Paper number 10 is about factions. And the one about factions is the Federalist number 10. Okay? By James Madison, and factions, by the way, we call them special interest groups today, or just interest groups. Okay? James Madison expressed concern over the possibility that both majority and minority, factions, would have too much power over government, and he presented ways of minimizing that danger. The United States Constitution established a democratic government, but also contains several I would maybe ask questions that's not a direct democracy. We established a representative democratic government. Whatever. It also contains several provisions that limited majority rule. Okay, cool. Throughout the next 2 centuries, the role of the majority rule in the United States government and politics continued to change. Okay, so notice they didn't ask me a question here, but I do want to keep this sort of thing in mind. All right, did they give me any hints up here that will help me down here? Now they're going to ask me to do stuff. I need to do what they ask me completely. I do not need to leave it to the grader to connect any of the dots. All right? If it says, is James Madison still alive? Or let's say, does it say, is Alexander Hamilton still alive? You don't want to say, no, he was in a duel with Aaron Burr. You would want to say, he was in a duel with Aaron Burr and Aaron Burr shot and killed him. You don't leave it to the grader to fill in that detail for you. They're not going to ask you that. That's a history question. But do you get my point? Don't say the AP grader will know what I mean, or the AP grader can figure this out for themselves. You give them the information, because that's what we're concerned about. Alright, it says identify the part of the national government that was originally most closely tied to citizens and explain how it was tied to citizens. So think your way through the national government. Which one was most closely tied to the citizens, and which one could you still argue is closely tied to the citizens? Well, the obvious way to tie a piece of the national government to the citizens to let them vote for that position. We do not vote for the courts and the justices, so eliminate that. We do not vote for bureaucrats, so eliminate the bureaucracy. That leaves the legislature and the presidency that we do vote for, but we vote for the president indirectly. Right? We actually select him through the Electoral College, so maybe that's not the answer. Let me see if there's something more directly selected by the citizens. The Senate and the House are both directly chosen by the people. And if you put that, I'm not sure if you're going to get credit, because it has a big fat originally in there. Meaning when the Constitution was originally ratified, before changes were made, before the amendments, and only one of those two was popularly elected, and that would be the House of Representatives. It was closer to the people because it was directly elected, and they served 2-year terms, so they had to worry about re-election and worry about the people's opinion. Remember the Senate, they love to ask this question. The Senate, they love to trick you into saying, oh yeah, the Senate too. The Senate was chosen by state legislatures. So again, indirectly elected. Right, chosen by a body that the people chose for their state governments. All right, and y'all remember the amendments? I told you in terms of amendments to know, you need to know all the first 10 except for 7. Or 7, not a big deal. The first 10 is the Bill of Rights. Then you need to know 13, 14, 15, the post-Civil War amendments. And then 17 is the one that changed that and made the Senate directly elected by the people. But originally it was the House. And by the way, in saying that, I just answered it. How was it closely tied to the citizens? Because it was directly elected. You might also say they were elected every 2 years to keep them responsive to the people's will. All right, B. Now I'm going to write a big B and say, here's why I'm answering B. Explains. Notice I didn't need to open with a quote from, Ben Franklin and close with a dramatic, patriotic statement. They don't want you to be patriotic. They don't want your opinion. They don't want to know that it's the land of the free and the home of the brave. All right? They just want, answer the question, answer completely, connect all the dots, don't leave that to the grader, and be done with it. You could have answered that one in one sentence. Let's see what the rubric says in just a second. Explain 2 ways the United States Constitution limited majority rule. There's lots of these. We'll look at the rubric in a second. A couple that come to mind since we've been studying them lately are the courts. The courts are not popularly elected, and they can strike down policies of those bodies that are popularly elected. I probably should say institutions that are popularly elected. Like they can strike down laws that Congress makes. Congress, in theory, responds to the will of the majority. But those can be struck down by the Supreme Court. Also, the Bill of Rights protects the minorities from abuse by the majority. Protects minority religions. It protects minority speech. In other words, speech that's not popular with the majority. Any other ideas on this one? Those are the first 2 that came to my mind. What?
Each state gets 2 senators,
so... Okay, yeah. Each state gets 2 senators, so that is not tied to population. That's more tied to state representation. So it limited at least the majority rule of populations, of numbers of people. Maybe it is majority rule of the states, but I bet that's on the rubric. I bet that's close enough. And that's a great idea if you can't think of another. You might say here, what about judicial review? All right, that's a way. That's not a person. That's not a branch of government. That's a way, though. Judicial review allows the courts to declare policies unconstitutional if the majority really likes them. And we'll see if there's any more on the rubric. C. Choose. Notice it says explain, so just saying judicial review is not enough. You say judicial review because it allows the courts to strike down policies. Anytime you want to talk about the government doing stuff, say policies. Policies that may be unconstitutional, that may be popular with the majority, but abuse the minority. Okay? Choose 2 of the following 20th century developments and explain how each moved the United States from a less democratic to a more democratic system. You kind of need to know what that means. Less to more democratic means more and more ruled by the people. So more and more maybe election type stuff. More and more decision making by the people. Right? The courts are not very democratic. We don't vote on them, and they don't care what we think. Alright? So we need to think about some things that would make the system more democratic. And notice, they need to be 20th century developments. Alright? So primary elections made the system more democratic. That's not that hard to explain. Instead of powerful party leaders choosing the candidates for each party, for the candidate that would run for the Republicans, and the candidate that would run to represent the Democrats in the election, we now have an election process called the primaries, where voters choose the Democrat that will run for office, and voters choose the Republican that will run for office. More choice by voters is more democracy. I might even put that sentence at the end there. More choice by voters is more democracy, to tie it back to the question. The 17th Amendment, one of the ones I tell you to know is, we've already explained how it made things more democratic. It made the Senate popularly elected instead of chosen by the state legislatures. More election by the people is more democratic. There we go, I just tied it back. And then, what about the expansion of suffrage? Remember, suffrage is the right to vote. This one's, if you remember that suffrage is the right to vote, and you're right, suffrage is the right to vote. If more people can vote, that's more rule by the people. It almost seems too easy. That's the answer. Okay, we'll take a look at the rubric. Is that the entirety of question 1?
Yes.
Okay, and I don't think that's too terribly long. Let's jump over to the rubric. Okay, so remember the first point was, what part of the national government was most closely tied to the citizens? And part A says 1 point is earned for identifying the House of Representatives or Congress. You could have just said plain old Congress. You're a little bit wrong because the Senate was not as closely tied to the people. But you could have said the House of Representatives or Congress, and then 1 point is earned for an explanation of how the House or Congress is most closely tied to the people. Well, what's a good explanation? Because notice here you have a point for saying the part of government and a point for saying the explanation. Members of the House are more directly elected than the President, and were originally more directly elected members of the Senate. That's what I said. The shorter term length, or more frequent elections, which is the same thing, ties them to the people because they have to worry about what the people think. We said that too. They're 2-year terms. Members must live in the state they represent. Nobody put that. All right, that's true. And members, ooh, yeah, this is probably maybe what somebody might have put this one. House members represent small districts, so they can connect to their constituency more easily than, say, the president who serves the whole country, or the senator who serves the whole state at large. All right, the next question asks us 2 ways the Constitution limited majority rule. And you have a lot of choices. Let's run through them very, very fast. You get 1 point for each of 2 explanations. Notice this is the rubric they handed to the graders, and they said each explanation must show how it limits majority rules. You can't just say, oh, the Electoral College. Well, how does that limit majority rule? Oh, the Bill of Rights. How does that limit majority rule? You've got to say how. Any of the following can be used, and this is not an exhaustive list, so I guess there must be other stuff. Okay, here's some stuff that limits how the majority can have an impact on government. The Electoral College limits the power of the majority by creating a layer in between the people and the election of the president. The idea was these elites can sort of edit the vote of the people if it doesn't make any sense. U.S. senators were originally selected by state legislatures. That's a limit on majority rule. We said, okay, we're going to indirectly choose them. Longer term lengths of senators makes them less responsive to majority rule because they don't have to worry about election as often. The independent judiciary, which is the idea that we don't elect our judges, means they don't respond to majority opinion. I think I said that when I said the judges, the fact that they're not elected. Life tenure for the Supreme Court judges. All right, this is also true of all national judges. Means they don't have to worry about re-election, and therefore they don't have to worry about popular opinion. The appointment process, and this is just another reference to the idea that our judiciary is not elected, they are appointed. Our representative form of government limits majority rule. Just the fact that the framers of the Constitution says we're not going to have direct democracy. That would be the purest majority rule we can think of. Instead of having direct democracy, we'll have representative democracy to keep the people from making irrational majority decisions. All right? And then they basically said, anything that limits the power of government as a whole can be used to protect us from irrational majorities. So basically anything that limits the government. That's a pretty big list. The Bill of Rights keeps the government from doing lots of things, and so you would want to talk about maybe one of those. From, say, establishing a state religion that's popular, the majority agrees with, but would then interfere with the rights of the minority. The fact that we express all the powers of the national government and say that's it, that's all of them, limits government power and I guess limits majority rule, because the majority elects Congress, and Congress has only certain powers. Specific prohibitions, so there are actually little pieces of the original Constitution that protect us from them in government and therefore from problems with majority rule, like no ex post facto laws, no bills of attainder. Separation of power limits government power. Checks and balances limits government power. Federalism gives a bunch of power to the states and limits the majority in the nation to abuse them, the power of the majority in the nation to abuse it by the minority, and bicameralism separates power within Congress. All these are sort of indirect ways that we limit the power of our government, and therefore that limits the ability of the majority to use our government against the minority. I wouldn't have put very many of these. I might have put Bill of Rights, but I wouldn't have put those because I wouldn't have thought that indirectly. I would want direct things that are shielded from the majority, like the judiciary. Bumping back to the question. Choose two. So you get to pick two. So let's see. Okay, 1 point. You get 1 point for each explanation. It has to state how the development cited moved the process from less democratic to more democratic. So you have to say something about it. You can't just say, hey, 17th Amendment. Well, how did it make things more democratic? Primary elections, voters gained control of the nomination process. It took it away from political parties. That's what I said. The 17th Amendment mandated direct election of U.S. senators. I guess that must be more democratic if it's more election by the people. The expansion of suffrage led to more representative set of voters and more eligible voters. If the people get to vote more, that sounds more democratic. I think that sounds too easy for a lot of students. They say, I can't just put they get to vote, so that's democratic. It's got to be more than that, but it's not necessarily. Okay, go to the next question. Any issues with that one? Anybody want to say, well, what about this? All right, here we go. Number 2. In the United States system, there are several linkage institutions. You need to have them memorized. It's the media, it's political parties, it's elections / campaigns, and it is interest groups. All right, there are several linkage institutions that connect citizens to government. Elections constitute one of them. All right, okay, cool. I guess they're going to make me talk about elections. Because of low voter turnout, elections represent an imperfect method of linking citizens to their government. Even when there is low voter turnout, however, other linkage institution connects citizens to government. Oh, okay, they want me to talk about the other ones. Describe how each of the following is related to the likelihood of voting. These, all you have to do is say the relationship. Just stating the relationship is enough. Older people vote more, full credit. You could also say younger people vote less. Education. More educated people vote more. An alternative answer would be less educated people vote less. That's all you needed. You don't need to say voting is one of our proudest institutions where the eagle flies on the home of the brave. You don't have to say it. Just answer the question. All right? Identify one current government electoral current. It's going to be current, I guess. One current government electoral requirement that decreases voter turnout. Explain how it decreases voter turnout. Did y'all think of any of these? What?
Voter registration.
You got to register. You have to jump over 2 hurdles to vote. You got to register first and then go vote. And registration is costly. I would probably say registration is hard for some people. They have to figure out how to do it, and they can't, or they don't want to. They don't have time. They may not speak the language. You could say that's a possible answer. Is that if the registration or the ballot is in only English, some voters may not speak English. Other answers could be, say, it's a little bit indirect, but I might just try if I couldn't think of anything else. What about the voting age requirement? You got to be 18 to vote. I guess that probably decreases voter turnout. I don't know. And then what is one linkage institution other than elections? So you just got to name one. The media, interest groups. What's the other one? The media, interest groups, and political parties. All right, it explains 2 ways it connects citizens to government. So let's see, they're going to give us examples for all of them. Let's jump over to our rubric. What did the first question say? Oh yeah, how do these 2 guys related to voting? Look, 1 point is either earned for saying older people are more likely to vote, or you could say turnout is lower for young people. And then the other one, people with more education are more likely, people with less education less likely. Either or. Say either one or both. That was easy. All right. The next one asks, what is an electoral requirement that decreases voter turnout? There's some that are so basic I didn't even think of them. Like you got to be a citizen. You got to be 18 or more. Certain groups aren't allowed to vote. Disenfranchised means taking away your rights. In this case, to vote. Like felons, people in jail, people in mental institutions can't vote. Residency requirements, meaning you got to vote where you live. Be hard for some people if they're out of the country or something. This is the one that they wanted. They wanted you to say, hey, registration makes it hard to vote, and the states all require you to register. Why do they do that if it reduces voter turnout?
So you don't have fraud?
Yeah, to avoid voter fraud. Limited opportunities to vote. Like, it's on a Tuesday. That reduces voter turnout. there's only so many hours you can go. They close the polls. It's only on one day of the year. You can vote early, yes, but in general, it's on Tuesday. The general election is. You might think, well, what about all that 4-month period of the primaries? Well, those are primaries. The general election is required to be on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. All right? You got to show ID. Some people don't have it because they just don't have any reason to drive, so they might have a driver's license. You generally have to vote in person. Some primaries are closed to party members only, and no one would put that. I wouldn't put that. Process of obtaining absentee ballots. It's basically hard to vote if you're out of the country or out of your state where you live. 1 point. Okay, and then the final question says, oh yeah, and then you got to explain why it decreases the likelihood of voting. Some of these mean that you can be ineligible to vote, and some of these mean it just makes it hard to vote. Okay, like registration makes it hard to vote. The age requirement makes you ineligible to vote. So these are the explanations that are possible. Sorry. Okay, here's the 3. They said name one of the other interest groups and give 2 ways it connects to the people. Okay, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on this. You can go pause the video if you want to see them all. So suppose you chose the media. The media obviously connects, and by the way, these work both ways. These connect government to the people and people to the government, and you can use either one. Okay? So for example, the media gives the views of the people to government, and the media gives the people information about what the government's doing. So it works both ways. And this counts as 2 separate answers. Okay, and here's some other things. People got really specific on their answers, so they said, I guess we have to allow interviewing citizens, reporting on government activities. Even though those seem so obvious, of course the media connects us to the government by telling us poll results, telling us the results of polls. So it counts. Of course the media connects us to government by interviewing public officials or covering protests. All right, over here in the interest group or PAC column, because interest groups donate money through PACs. They let you donate. They let you help with a donate to a campaign. They convey policy information to group members, meaning they work within the Iron Triangle to communicate with the committee in Congress that's associated with their interest. All right. Now they can run ads on TV to communicate the views of the people to the government and vice versa. Although the ads on TV usually focus on voters. But if it affects voters and they vote in a different government, it still works. All right. And here's some other things they do. They lobby. I would have thought of that one. Lobby. Send the lobbies. Campaign, write letters. Grassroots means sort of bottom up from the people up movements. Litigation means engage in the court process. So go argue your case in court. Or if you're not one of the parties in court, like the NAACP helped Linda Brown, but if you're not the NAACP, you might have sent a friend of the court brief to advise the court on Brown v. Board of Education through an amicus curiae brief. All right. So just go to the video and pause this, and you can look over all the possible answers. Parties obviously connect people to government by allowing them to donate and volunteer on campaigns, and they also set up a platform and recruit candidates, mobilize voters, mail out information, fund candidates. This is kind of advanced politics here. Aggregate and articulate interests. All right, so let's go back to the question 3. Notice there's a lot of choices, and I think they wanted 2. All right, 3 says the United States Congress, the majority party exerts a substantial influence over lawmaking. However, even when one party has a numerical advantage in each chamber of the United States Congress, there is no guarantee that legislation supported by that majority party will be passed by both chambers. I bet they're going to ask me about the filibuster, or I bet that's one of the answers, because that's how the minority party can block things in the Senate. Rules of each chamber independently influence the likelihood that legislation will pass in that chamber. Legislation passed by one chamber is not always passed by the other. Only the Senate has a filibuster. Describe 2 advantages the majority party in the United States House of Representatives has in lawmaking, above and beyond the numerical advantage that the majority party enjoys in floor voting. So other than the fact that they are the majority, what other advantage do they have? Well, they get to pick the leaders of the committees. They get to have a majority on all the committees. There's 2. The majority party gets to pick the speaker in the House. They get to pick the majority leader in the Senate. So they choose the leadership, right? That's 4. If you wanted to split that up and be like, they get to choose the speaker in the House and the majority leader in the Senate, that might count as 2, depending on who your grader is. So let's look at the list on the rubric and see what they said. Describe two differences between the House and Senate rules that may make it likely that the legislation may pass in one chamber but not in the other. The first thing that should come to mind is the filibuster. Senators can filibuster and make bills less likely to pass. Okay? Members of the House have limited debate. There's also that thing about how senators can attach non-germane amendments called riders that might make the bill fail, or might allow a rider that otherwise wouldn't pass to ride along with the bill and get passed when it wouldn't have worked otherwise. All right? Anything else? Those are the two I thought of. The filibuster, and they can attach non-germane amendments that might doom a bill. But I bet there's others. And then explain how the differences identified in Part B can lead to the passage of the bill in one chamber but not in the other. I did that as I was talking about Part B. Let's look at possible answers. Here's Part 3. The first one they asked us, what's an advantage the majority has? Okay? Your description must include three components. Talking about the majority party. Why would you talk about anything else? That's what they asked you about. What's the advantage? And your statement of the advantage has to be true. You can't say something like, oh, the majority party gets to choose the majority and the minority leader. Well, they do get to choose most of the leadership. They obviously don't get to choose the minority. All right, so you can say they chair the committees, which means the committee leaders. They control all the committees. Well, an important one is the Rules Committee. I think that's kind of a lame answer. They set the agenda. That's true because the Speaker has the more power than anybody over the agenda in the House. And the majority party leader has more power than anybody in the Senate. So they determine the agenda. They control the debate. In other words, they get to talk first. They get to speak in the House. They get the majority on the committees. And they have a lot of extra influence on assigning bills to committees. So they can assign them to places that they might be likely to die or might be likely to be reported out. All right. Here's their chart of differences between the House and Senate that can affect the ability of a bill to pass. They needed two. All right. You'd have to explain why the more formal rules in the House affects the passage of a bill as opposed to the less formal rules in the Senate. I don't know if I'd do that. That seems kind of difficult to deal with. But the filibuster is easy. Okay. Holds. All right. I didn't teach you what those were. Well, I wouldn't put that. Unanimous consent agreements. I wouldn't put that either. I didn't teach you what those were, but I taught you that in the House, amendments must be germane, and in the Senate, they do not have to be, because that can affect the passage of the bill. And then there are rules in the House about this, limiting debate and amendments. Okay. Oh, here's the explanations. The filibuster says even though a House may pass a bill, the Senate can kill the bill in the filibuster. Here's some stuff about holds. Here's some stuff about unanimous consent agreements. All right. The Senate can act germaneness. The Senate can add unrelated content that members of the House might find objectionable and so decide not to pass the bill. The Rules Committee, even though the Senate may pass a bill, the House Rules Committee can hinder the passage of that bill in the House. They didn't even explain why. They just said it hurts. And that appeared to be a good enough answer. Now, this final one, though, is very likely, I'm pretty sure 100% of the time, but there's a 99% chance that there will be a chart or graph or maybe political cartoon, some kind of graphic. And they tend to be to have at least a couple of super easy parts. But you got to sort of look through the chart to find the answer. They tend to have some super easy parts. I'll show you the classic super easy chart or graph question when we get done. All right, but this is a nice little table or chart or whatever you want to call it. Let's see if we can. All right, viewers, ages, and frequency of viewing nightly network news, 1974 and 2002. Looks like the overall trend is young people watch the news less, and old people watch the news more. Couldn't you say that? Whether it's 1974 or 2002. Yeah? And then it also seems that all groups, whether the young people going from 45% that watch it frequently to only 19%, 13% watching it rarely up to 22%, or old people going from watching it frequently 71% of the time to only 53%, and rarely 5 to 8%, looks like the time trend is people in general, regardless of their age, watch less nightly news. Let's see if they ask me about that. Why did they ask me about it? I bet they do. I bet they will eventually. First thing they said is, the news media influence politics through setting the agenda. Remember, the agenda is a list of issues that are important, that are receiving attention. Define policy agenda, the list of issues that are important, that are receiving attention from policymakers, or the media, or the people. On the second day of class, we wrote that on our super important vocabulary list. It's a good thing to look over. Along with policy, along with institution, right? Along with federalism. All right, explain how the national news media engage in agenda setting. I like to say, where the media points the cameras, the people, and therefore the government, pay attention. That's a little bit informal, though. You might say, by focusing its attention on one issue as opposed to another, the media will draw attention to that issue as opposed to the other issue. And the people will focus on that issue. The government officials will focus on that issue. I'll probably clean up my language there a little bit because that was confusing sounding. The idea is the media helps set the policy agenda by choosing what counts as a story and what doesn't. Explain the primary reason the president tends to have an advantage over Congress in gaining media attention. What is it? Well, it has to do with the fact that when there's only one president, when he speaks, he has a larger audience. It's very difficult for the media to follow what 535 members of Congress are saying. So it's the idea that one president is easy for the media to report on as opposed to 535 members of Congress and what they're saying. Also, he's got a national constituency. He represents everybody. You might not have voted for him, but he makes law for everybody. Congressmen only have a state, if they're from the Senate, a state constituency or a district constituency. So people may not listen when a senator that's not from their state talks. Okay, now we get to look at the table, thankfully, because it's so easy. Describe the difference in viewing patterns of older and younger age groups. Older people watch more news, regardless of the year, right? Done. Describe the change from 1974 through 1972 for all age categories. All age categories watch less nightly news. Done. Given the information in the table, describe one implication for presidents and their use of the media to promote their political and policy objectives to the American public. The obvious one is, going on the news will mean a smaller audience. So you might have to use some sort of alternative method, like Twitter, or I don't know, cutting into a normally scheduled nightly sitcom that people are going to watch. Let's see what the AP test said. All right, the first question about what is the policy agenda, hopefully I got it right. Policy agenda is a set of issues, problems, or subjects. Gets the attention and is viewed as important by the people involved in policymakers. It's a list of issues important to people making policy, whether that's the government or other government decision makers. That's the same thing. Right? Okay. But notice you needed all three parts to get credit for that one point. It's going to be very complete. All right. 1 point is earned for a correct explanation of how the national news media engage in agenda setting. All right. So they'd asked you, explain how the national news media engage in agenda setting. So I guess you got to write that. Well, one thing you could have put is it raises awareness, provides information, draws attention. That's what I put. Or demonstrates the importance of consequences of the problem to get the public's attention. And it also gets the attention of policymakers. You could have put either one of those. When the news media focus on one issue, like I don't know, gay rights, let's say. If that's getting media attention, policymakers might give it more attention. Or the people might give it more attention and cause policymakers to care about it more. The next one asked you, what's the primary reason the president gets an advantage in gaining media attention? There's a lot of these. The president's one person. Congress is many people. All right? And then how does that give the president an advantage? Well, the president speaks with a single voice, while Congress has many voices. I think that's just a repeat of what you just said. But here's the thing. Here's what I always like to say about AP answers. They asked me to do two things. Explain. They said explain. So that typically means you need to say and then explain. So explain is two things. So you want to make sure you write two sentences. Even though on this rubric, the first sentence, the president is one person while the Congress is many, and the president speaks with a single voice while Congress has many voices, it's just a repeat of the first one. But you gave the grader a chance to say, there's where he did the first part, and there's where she did the second part. You need to give the grader something to put their pencil by and say, they did something. Check. All right? Other explanations, the president represents the nation. Members of Congress represent states or districts. I like that one. That's one. The president is a national leader of the country, which is the lamest answer ever. Sounds like that's kind of a middle school answer. I'm sorry. But people do look to him as the ceremonial head of state, so that's a legitimate answer. The president is more powerful than any single member of Congress. It's probably true. All right? The president has constitutional powers that Congress doesn't have. That may be true too, but Congress has constitutional powers the president doesn't have. Either way, you can make an argument there. You can put something, maybe the grader will want to give you credit for. All right. Notice here we were exactly right. Young people view TV less, and old people view TV more. TV news. People in all age categories watch less news. All right, and then the final question, what is the implications of all this for the president? What's the implication for these viewing patterns that people watch less news? All right, he might rely on alternative media to gain the attention of the public. What was the substantive example I gave? Twitter. All right. He might target an older audience because they're the ones watching the news. So don't say anything bad about Social Security. They'll be upset. The nightly news, he might just decide the nightly news is not effective. That's such an obvious statement. Can it possibly get credit? The nightly news is not as effective as it used to be for promoting the president's agenda. I guess they took it because somebody wrote it. All right? I want to show you one more thing. Let me buzz over here to my projector. I want to show you. You might consider that such an incredibly easy chart question. The part that said, hey, what's the deal with this chart? Hey, old people watch more news. You might think, man, I get your point. Let me show you. Oh, no, it's not on here. All right, never mind. I'll have to draw it. Okay, 1 year on the AP test. They had some sort of chart. And down here was time. And over here was voter turnout. And there was a line going like this. And it said, hey, what's the trend? The answer was, voter turnout has decreased over time. Some people didn't know what to put. Because they thought, no, it can't be that. It's got to be something sophisticated and smart guy sounding. If you don't know, put something. It might be that easy, okay? I think they had another line going the other way that it was like, over time, it was like the budget deficit. Over time, the budget deficit has increased. So it can be just that easy. Give the grader something to put a check by. Give him a chance to look at your answer and go, I'm feeling generous, and put a check by it. Everybody got it? Respond to all the tasks. Don't make the grader fill in your logic for you. Even if the logic is obvious. Keep it real.